Welcome to today's video. In this video, we're going to cover the 7 properties you absolutely must stay away from when you're buying a house in Tucson. Seriously, in the 15 years I've been working professionally in real estate, these are the horror stories that I have heard about. So stay tuned. Also, as a bonus, I'm going to share with you one little known issue about certain homes in Tucson that most buyers never think to ask about. And to be honest with you, most real estate professionals don't either. Stay tuned for that. Let's jump in. Hey, I'm Rich, and my family's lived in Tucson for over 150 years. If you want to know everything that there is to know about lifestyle, real estate, and new builds in Tucson and the greater Tucson area, then you've definitely come to the right channel. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon to stay tuned in so that you don't miss a thing. Now, for those of you that don't know, I have worked professionally in real estate in Tucson for over 15 years. And in that time, I've helped a couple thousand people like you buy or sell a home. So whether you're looking today or a year from today, grab my contact information out of the description below. I'll put it on screen for convenience right here. Let's get connected. You can call, text, email, even schedule a free Zoom consult. We can meet face to face to discuss your short-term or long-term real estate goals. Now, as we jump into this list is compiled from my experience over that 15 years between my appraisal business, where I've probably appraised 3,000 to 4,000 homes across Tucson, and in my sales business, having sold hundreds and hundreds of homes. These are the horror stories that I've been involved with, whether I'm representing a buyer or a seller, and how we helped them navigate through it. I'm going to walk you through the data, the risk factors, and specific things to look out for so that when you buy your house, you already have an idea of what are some of the common things and red flags to pay attention to. Number 1 is going to be homes located in high flood zones. Now, I know what you're thinking about. It's the desert. If you're not from here, you may not associate rain with the desert much. I know, working with a lot of people relocating to Tucson from other areas, it's not exactly something that is on the top of the list of concerns or questions. But believe it or not, we've got over 500 miles of mapped floodplain in the Tucson area. So there is quite a bit of areas in Tucson, different floodplains that you want to pay attention to. And yes, whether you're looking in suburban areas on the outskirts of Tucson, rural areas on the way outskirts of Tucson, or even Midtown right in the middle of Tucson, there are flood zones and homes are affected by that. Now, not so specific to Tucson, but anytime your home is in a floodplain, if you are financing it, it's going to be a requirement from the lender to have some sort of flood insurance. Now, that flood insurance is an extra cost, and in most cases, it's about $1,000 extra a year. If you're someone who's a retiree, if you're on a fixed income, if you're really making a move to Tucson for affordability, this is absolutely something you want to pay attention to. And most of this can be identified ahead of time using FEMA flood maps or even the Pima County floodplain database that you can jump on. Both are free websites open to the public, so you can check those out. But really doing some due diligence before you get through your inspection period. Oftentimes that is disclosed in public records. Every time we do a property search for someone and we're setting up inspections after getting into contract, that's always something that is going to come up. Also, there's some other checks and balances, such as if the home is on the market and the property disclosure statement is filled out, which in most cases it is, by the seller. That could be an indication there on the property disclosure that they're required to have flood insurance, or maybe they've had some past flood issues. It is one of the questions that they are asked on that document, on if they're aware of any flood issues with the property at all. Now, in extreme cases, these homes located in flood areas can restrict some of the lending, which From a resale perspective, can be extremely limiting in terms of your buyer pool and in turn the value itself. I have worked a lot in suburban and rural areas that this is mainly affected, even some urban areas right in Midtown, right in central Tucson, where we've had some flooding issues. I had a friend's house that flooded. It was a brand new house built in central Tucson. They graded the lot incorrectly based on the flow of water. When water hits, it hits hard. The monsoon storms that hit us from, August, September, maybe early October, they can be torrential downpours. And because our soil is so hard, it doesn't soak into the ground as fast. So we've got a natural concrete layer that under the dirt that kind of impedes water seeping into the ground. And a lot of that means when we have a lot of heavy rainfall very, very quickly, it doesn't really have anywhere to go except build up and then flood out different areas, parking lots, intersections, streets, homes. And so in these high flood zones, you want to be careful because sometimes a home will be indicated that it's on the edge of a flood zone. And in extreme cases, you might even get a little bit of that water in your garage, in your front door, something like that. So it is something that we can take care of in the inspection period. Oftentimes it's something that we identify when we're sorting through properties that our clients are interested in. So if that's something that you're interested in and you just want to do some checks and balances, there's lots of resources. FEMA flood maps. Pima County has a flood map tool that you can check out that gives you some good data on that as well. Now, number 2 on the list is homes with polybutylene piping. Now, polybutylene piping, or poly-B as it's known, is a type of plumbing that was used predominantly in the 1980s to mid 90s. And so it was used nationwide. There was several communities that were built during that time where they predominantly used poly-B piping. It's much more common in older parts of Continental Ranch, which is a big, well-established master plan community in Northwest Tucson, as well as other areas like Rita Ranch, another master plan community near Vail. And there are many other areas around Tucson that were built during that time frame that definitely you're going to want to do a little bit of research and ensure that it does not have polybutylene piping. Now, the reason that polybutylene piping or poly-B piping is an issue is because it wasn't discovered until it was already installed in thousands of homes, but it becomes brittle over time. And so once it becomes brittle, it's not a guarantee that if you have polybutylene piping that you're going to have an issue. I've sold plenty of houses with polybutylene piping. It's been identified. I've sold a lot of houses where it's been identified, and then we were able to negotiate a full replumb or some sort of cash discount or concession made to offset the cost of a replumb. So there's a lot of creative ways that we can work around it, but it's definitely something you want to be aware of because a replumb for a house can cost $6,000 to $12,000 depending on the size, the amount of fixtures, the access, through the walls, all of that sort of stuff. But the piping, once it becomes brittle, it is at risk of breaking. And under pressure, those lines, it pops. You get a leak behind your wall. It can flood, that whole area of your house. And there's a leak behind your wall. You can't really get to it. You most likely don't even know that it's going on until it's caused severe damage. So it is definitely something that you want to investigate in the inspections. It is something that if it's known, it will be noted, or it should be noted on the seller's property disclosure statement that we as agents will review and email to you as our clients. But if it is present, it is definitely something that we're going to want to address or remedy, or at a very minimum, make sure that there's some awareness around and some solutions have been discussed. Now, one tip is in the inspection, or if you're in the process of looking at homes, and if you can see any of the plumbing sticking out of the wall, predominantly under a sink in the kitchen, under a sink in the bathroom. Sometimes they will have some of the flexible tubing coming out of the wall. And if that tubing is gray, or in the garage around the hot water heater, or sometimes they have panels that open up in a certain area of the wall that allow you to see all of the connections. If you see a gray plastic piping and it usually says PB2110 on it, that's polybutylene piping. And so just because it's there and present, because you see that, doesn't necessarily mean that it's active. Because when they do replumb a house, they'll usually leave the old plumbing in place and then add new plumbing in the walls, because it's easier to just pretty much abandon the old plumbing, leave it in the wall, and then replumb the new stuff next to it. So oftentimes that is what they do. But a little tip, if you are looking and you happen to see gray piping that's directly feeding an active outlet that does have that writing on it, then it's definitely something that you want to keep on your radar and probably investigate a little bit further. Number 3 is homes that back to busy highways, busy streets, and are in the direct flight path of incoming and outgoing aircraft. Now in Tucson, we've got Interstate 10, we've got I-19, Interstate 19. Those are the two main interstates. We've also got some major thoroughfares such as Kolb Road, Grant Road, Aviation Highway, and we have some major airports as well, including Tucson International Airport and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. In an appraisal term, they call this external obsolescence. When you are located within a close enough proximity where you have some sort of obsolescence in terms of noise, could be some sort of pollution, gas smell, any type of annoyance or anything that could change your enjoyment of the property is considered external obsolescence. Really what that means is that it's going to limit your buyer pool. It's not that if you buy a home in that area, you're not going to be able to resell it. There's a buyer for every home at a certain price, for sure. But generally what it means is that those homes in a resale world are going to sell for less. They're going to be more difficult to sell. They're going to have a lower buyer pool. They're probably going to stay on the market longer. You're going to have to make more concessions when you sell it. And so for that reason, this is a really important number 3 on the list, because I've helped sell a lot of these homes for people who have decided that, hey, they want to sell a house and they've got major power lines behind them, or they have a large community pump that's located on the other side of their wall, or their home lot backs up to a freeway, or they're right under the flight path for the F-16s that rip around Davis-Monthan Air Force Base at 8:30 p.m. when they're doing some drills. So that is something that most buyers want to take into account. And because of that, there's really not much you can do to fix this. I mean, it's really one of those things that you'd have to be okay with, which totally some people are. But long term, I think short term, it's a question of, are you going to be okay with this over the next couple seasons of your enjoyment of this property? But also, have you purchased this property at a price that allows you to then resell it at some point in the future and have reasonable expectations of how long that might take, how that might affect the price, and what additional concessions you might have to make in order to get that property sold? Now, in some cases, I've seen this type of external factor affect a house by 5, 10, even 15% of value. In fact, I can think of one case where I had a home with it was in Northwest Tucson, Continental Ranch, and it was located directly next to one of the main plumbing pump wells that was pumping water out of the ground. Didn't really make any noise, didn't really have a smell, but it was very unsightly. It was right on the corner, it was right next door. The walls were low enough you could clearly see it, and that was a big factor. It was part of the feedback that we got over and over and over when people walked through this house and we were touring and highlighting the house to potential buyers. And ultimately that house ended up selling 15 to 20% below what the comparable houses without that external obsolescence we're selling for. Now, one tip is in your inspection period, I really recommend that in order to take advantage of the property that you find that you really, really like and make sure that you don't miss an opportunity, save this for after you get into contract. You can negotiate the price, then in the initial contract, submit the contract, get it into contract, and then during your inspection period, which in Arizona you have 10 calendar days to conduct inspections, I would recommend that you go to the property at rush hour. You maybe go visit the property at a couple different times during the day to try to see what type of air traffic there might be, what type of noise, what type of car traffic. Sometimes there's even businesses that are within the vicinity. You might have an auto shop, a mechanic shop that's open late, that's got that really, really loud equipment, or an auto body shop that's making a lot of noise. You don't know. So I would recommend that you go visit that area, not necessarily go inside the house, but you can certainly drive by it a couple different times, sit out front for 10, 20 minutes and just kind of make sure you're absorbing what other factors might be around the house that you would want to know about. Number 4 is going to be homes that have unpermitted additions or unpermitted conversions of, say, a carport or garage converted into living space. Now, as a local Tucsonan and someone who has toured a lot of real estate, this is something that's very, very common. And it's common in central Tucson. It's common in South Tucson. There are some areas predominantly where there's older homes that this is very, very common. An Arizona room is something that is kind of a household term in Tucson. And an Arizona room essentially is a rear porch that has been enclosed with windows and is now receiving some sort of ambient heating and cooling from the rest of the house, or they even add like a little window unit in it. They call it an Arizona room. It's essentially an unpermitted conversion of a porch. Now, the reason that you want to be really careful with this is because it can affect you from a resale perspective. Also, you as a buyer, you could get into contract on it and it could be discovered and identified as an issue by the appraiser, assuming you're financing, where the appraiser is now asking for permits. Permits can't be supplied, and therefore it's now a lending issue. So you get 20, 30, 40 days into this process, and all of a sudden you can't move forward with the house that you wanted to buy. So it's just information like this that can help you kind of prepare and understand what you need to be aware of specifically in Tucson. Oftentimes there are carports that are converted to living areas. I've seen garages converted to living areas. And so it's not something that's super unique, but it is something that is somewhat commonplace, that permits are not pulled. It's done DIY. Not that it wasn't done correctly, but without a permit, that could potentially be an issue for an appraiser, therefore an issue for a lender, and therefore an issue for you. And so you can avoid that altogether by getting ahead of that. That's not to say that there aren't some instances where you can still make it work with the appraisal and everything like that, but it's certainly something you want to be cautious of because it can definitely stall financing and create more hurdles in the appraisal process. Now, again, a tip for you is you can do online permit searches through Pima County Developmental Services. You can call them. They have weird hours. They have hours literally from like 2 to 4 p.m., like 3 or 4 days a week. It's something goofy. So they're not exactly super convenient to get a hold of over the phone. You can email them, which is probably the best thing to do. You can go visit them in person. Their office is downtown. Or you can access their online database permit search. Not every document is uploaded, but in my experience, in all of the appraisal work that I've done over my career, that taking that step to do the appraisal or to do the permit search on something like an Arizona room, I would say 80 to 90% of the time, the information online was satisfactory, was adequate to be able to determine whether there was a permit or not. There are those 10, 20% chances where you're going to have to call, email, speak to someone specifically at the office to be able to verify whether it's permitted or not. Now, if you've watched up to this point and you're scratching your head thinking, man, what other issues do I need to be aware of? Stay tuned because we've got more. If you're looking and considering buying a house in Tucson, let's get connected. You can grab my contact information out of the description below. I'll put it on screen here. You can call, text, email, schedule a free Zoom consult. Would love to be a resource and help you navigate this. Also, stay tuned because I'm going to share with you a little known issue almost no buyers ask about. And it's something that is really going to make a difference if you're looking for a great Tucson home. All right, up at number 5 is going to be homes located in an HOA that's currently in litigation or has very low reserves. Now, I just recently had this situation happen with a buyer that we were working with. We had gotten through the inspection period. We were waiting for some confirmation documents from the HOA, which HOAs, I don't know if it's just a Tucson thing. I tend to think it's not just a Tucson thing. I think it's more of an HOA thing, but they're not exactly speedy in how quickly they get responses and information to you. So we were waiting on additional documentation from the HOA. And once we got that, it was discovered that the HOA was in a huge lawsuit and it was currently being litigated, and it was, probably was going to go on for a while, and there was no telling what direction it was going to go. And because of that, the lender essentially wasn't able to lend on that particular condo complex at that moment. So we had jumped through all the hoops. Our buyer was excited, and come to find out, once we finally got those documents, we found out that there was this huge lawsuit, and it was all pending, and it completely held up the whole financing process. Now, as far as reserves go, reserves are essentially think about it like a savings account for an HOA in case they need to do improvements to the roads or improve a park, or if there was something that was damaged that they need to fix in the community, that's their responsibility. Generally, lenders want to see at least 10% reserves in the HOA. That can fluctuate depending on location, timing, lending standards, but generally that is what I've been familiar with. One of the most painful things that you can experience when you're part of an HOA is a special assessment, because they tend to happen by surprise. They tend to happen very quickly. They're usually applied across the board, and they can be anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 or more. And that's assessed to each owner of a home in the HOA. And, that's kind of like cough it up, everybody's kind of going around stealing your lunch money type of feel. So it's not exactly a comfortable feeling for most homeowners. I personally have never had it done to me. If I'm being honest with you, I've never lived in a HOA before either. I've lived mainly in central Tucson. There's very, very few HOAs because most of the homes in central Tucson are older. But if you do live in an HOA, that is something, a well-managed HOA can avoid this, but a mismanaged HOA can definitely pose some significant headaches and hurdles for you. And because of that, it's definitely something that you're going to want to pay attention to. Now, as a tip, as part of your due diligence or part of the contract in Arizona, you're going to be provided the HOA information such as meeting minutes, the reserve study, any pending litigation information. So just know that you can ask for this information, as you should. You should definitely, if you're getting into a home with an HOA, you should definitely take a look and make sure that you have somebody on your side who can look through that, decipher it, help you make sense of it. But regardless, in Arizona, you're going to be provided a copy of that. If you're financing, it's going to be most likely a lender requirement. So it's not like a step that you're going to get a chance to skip or miss or anything like that. You've got lots of checks and balances through the process if you are financing that are likely going to pick it up. Next up on the list is number 6. This is going to be poorly done remodels and or DIY renos. In Tucson, we have a lot, especially in Midtown and central Tucson, we have a lot of older homes. And because of that, remodeling is a real big thing. from professional remodeling companies to big national financial institutions coming in and buying up, 5 to 10% of the homes and doing remodels there, to, mom and pops living in a house, remodeling, DIY, doing what they can, and then putting it back on the market and selling it. You get the full spectrum. And because I've worked in real estate as long as I have, I've got to see the whole spectrum too. I've walked through the houses that have plumbing, run in across windows. They have gas lines run across windows. You look out a window and there's literally a gas line on the exterior that goes right through the window, right through the line of sight through the window. I've seen all sorts of corners cut, from electrical to plumbing to roofing, foundation. And so because of that, this is definitely something that I wanted to put on the radar, because it's very common, even in, there are a lot of remodels that happen in Tucson that are just cosmetic. And I just recently ran into this as well. Somebody that we were working with ended up buying a property, and with the intention of doing some light remodeling. And once they got into it, it was kind of a can of worms, because when they ripped up the carpet, there was old linoleum flooring. And what they discovered, and when they started ripping up the linoleum, is that there was asbestos in the linoleum, right? So now they have asbestos remediation that they have to do, and they didn't know any better. None of us could have known, because we didn't rip up the flooring prior to that. It's all hidden underneath. So there can be these hidden things that you want to be aware of as well, depending on the age of a home. But if you're buying a home that's already remodeled, sometimes they're just putting lipstick on these things. They're putting, flooring over old flooring, or they're putting cabinets over walls that had some sort of a leak behind it. And so sometimes that information can be picked up on the disclosure. But once the house has been remodeled, it's going to be really hard to see what type of issues it had. The home inspectors that are certified and that are going to come out, they're going to mainly do a visual inspection. They'll test all of the components that they can test, but they can't punch holes in walls. They can't rip out drywall and get a look behind the cabinets. They're really somewhat limited. They have some significant limitations in what they can observe. And because of that, I think really looking at the details of a home, of how the doors were hung and how the quality of craftsmanship in terms of the cabinet install, countertop install, there's these details of a home that, if you've walked through enough remodels like I have, it kind of speaks to you, where you can really look at it. You can look at the grout lines. You can see, whether the grout is evenly done or whether there's pockets. You can tell whether the tile on the floor is even. There's these little cues that you'll pick up on, or at least hopefully you're able to hire someone who can pick up on that. Because if you're looking for a remodeled house, there's some incredible options, and you want to be in business, or you want to make sure you have someone on your side who can navigate you through the ones that are probably ones you want to be a little cautious of as well. And up at number 7, we've got HVAC and or swamp cooler conversions or older units. Now, because we live in the desert and our summers are hot, if you didn't know, an HVAC is a pretty critical component. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. That is your lifeline out here, especially in those summer months. Now, we have 6 to 8 months of beautiful weather where, does it get cold enough to use a heater? I think so. But we've got people moving from Canada, East Coast, that don't use the heater at all. They leave their windows open when it's 35 degrees and it feels great. But neither here nor there. An HVAC is a critical component to you being comfortable within your house. And because of the average age of homes in Tucson, HVAC is oftentimes one of the biggest, most expensive components, and one of the most likely components to be aging out, where it's essentially at or beyond its effective age. Still might be running, still might be operational, still might be blowing cold air, might pass the general HVAC test. But when it does go out, you're going to be stuck with the bill. And right now that bill is going to be somewhere between $12,000 and $15,000, depending on the size of the unit and what type of level and quality of unit you want, the actual SEER rating, and how efficient it is compared to how much electricity it takes and how efficient and effectively it cools your house. Essentially, how well it cools your house for how little energy it consumes, making it more affordable. Now, one tip again is on the property, the seller's property disclosure. They're typically going to answer the question of how old is the AC. If it's blank, it's almost certainly an indication that it's old. It's maybe original. I've seen ACs 25, 30 years old, still running. I mean, they look like a dinosaur out there. They're screaming and scratching and making all kinds of noise, and the fan's going sideways, but they're still blowing cold air. And so there's a lot of different ways we can remedy this. Certainly, this is more of something that if this is identified as a property that checks all of the boxes that you really are liking, and it happens to have an AC that's older or questionable, I wouldn't say eliminate that, but it's definitely something that you're going to want to pay attention to. There's home warranties. There's very comprehensive home warranties that you can take advantage of that do total 100% coverage of replacement. Oftentimes we're able to negotiate that, some sort of concession or a full-blown replacement. We've done that numerous times from the seller prior to you moving in. So again, I think it really matters who you hire through this process. A lot of what I've talked about today is my experience having navigated this process a couple thousand times for buyers, sellers, and even through the appraisal process. So this is something else that you want to pay attention to. Now, as promised, the one thing that buyers almost never think to ask about is the sewer line. Because our homes in Tucson, at least the majority of them in central Midtown, and a lot of the even suburban areas, were built in the 1960s, 70s, those homes usually have old cast iron pipes. And generally the rule of thumb is that if the house is 50 years old or more, you should definitely be questioning the sewer line. Now, we have a lot of cast iron pipes. Cast iron is very, very common. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be an issue, but it certainly could be, because cast iron will scale and start to rust from the inside out, and it will become very brittle. And because of that, there's a couple different options. It's definitely not one of those situations where you can't remedy it, but there's a cost associated with it. And if you're not going to do the due diligence, or if you don't have a team around you or an individual or professional that can really guide you through this, then they're not going to know what to look for. They're not going to know the solutions. Luckily, there are lots of solutions with cast iron pipes that avoid excavation entirely. They can repipe and reline the entire interior of the pipe without doing excavation. That's one of the more affordable options. In some cases, it is completely repiped. Like actually the house that I live in right now, it was an early 1900s house. The cast iron was completely shot. I mean, it was caved in some areas. And so because of that, and we were doing so much excavation anyway to build a new portion, do a bunch of additions and modifications, I just opted to have it trenched and all new ABS put in. But had I not been doing that, a trenchless repiping would have been the solution. But again, we're talking $5,000, $10,000, maybe $15,000, depending on who you hire and depending on how long the runs are. It's a big expense that you want to be prepared for. A tip is, for sure, if the home is 50 years old or older, get a sewer scope. Most plumbing companies will provide this. If you need a plumbing company, a good reputable plumbing company that can do a sewer scope that's affordable, comment below. Let me know. Really, if there's anything that you need, comment below, and I'd be happy to share my network of licensed plumbers that can help you. Drop a comment below. Have you ever dealt with any of these before, whether it be in Tucson or wherever you're located at right now? I'm very curious. I personally read all of the comments myself and respond. So comment below and let me know if you've dealt with any of these 7 issues, or maybe there's some other issue that you're more prone to experiencing based on where you're from. There you go. Now you know the types of homes to think twice about in Tucson. If you are planning on buying or selling a home, let's get connected. All my contact information is below. You can call, text, email, schedule a free Zoom consult so that we can get connected and talk face to face. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in and watching, and we'll see you on the next one.